Move on to our next session. India's digital payments infrastructure has become a global model. And our next speaker is a leading voice on global fintech, focusing on advancing regulated, interoperable payments infrastructure and shaping the future of cross-border digital finance with a strong emphasis on India's growing role in the global payments ecosystem. Before I invite up the next speaker and the moderator, just a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, after this at around 7:30, we will be joined by Shri Kiran Rijiju. The Honorable Minister will be here to talk about Parliament logjam. It will definitely be a very interesting session. All right, to discuss India's fintech power play, designing the future of global payments with Sumita Karir, who's the Deputy News Editor at ET Now, I'd like to welcome on stage Mr. Prabpreet Singh Gill, Founder and Chairman of Pay10.
All right, thank you very much, Sumit, for that introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the second last session of what's been a fulfilling and an insightful day over the past 2 days, I'm sure you'd agree with me. We've had the opportunity to listen to some of the best in the business from government, from, of course, various business houses as well. And I promise you that this session is only going to be building up on the learnings that we've gathered over the past 2 days. And let me welcome once again Mr. Prabpreet Singh Gill. He's the chairman of Pay10 Global and Eastern Fortune Investments. Thank you very much, Mr. Gill, for taking the time out and being here with us at the India Economic Conclave. And we're going to be building up on what we've been discussing over the past 2 days, which is essentially around geopolitics and geoeconomics and how that's impacting how businesses are doing and operating operating differently across very many geographies that they operate in. And you are operating not just in India, but very many geographies across the globe. So how have you, sort of navigated these very, very turbulent past couple of months in your experience as a businessman, as a CEO? How are you navigating these turbulent times?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. I think as we are currently operating about 10 countries and licensed in about 4 countries, we understand it has been a turbulent past couple of months or probably a quarter. So I think payments has also been a turbulent way, but the only way is to be more reliant on the payments itself and how every country can be focusing on the domestic payments itself and financially independent on these payment rails, and how then can you focus on avoiding tariffs and then be focused on the tariffs part and everything. So I think it's been a little bit upsetting across the regions. The sentiments are different, but I think every country is doing its best to overcome the challenge.
Right, so every country is doing its best to overcome the challenges, and of course, even as we speak, India has signed an FTA with Oman. We are sort of forging our own bilateral alliances. But in terms of how businesses are looking at these very turbulent times, how are you looking at, for instance, when a tariff is imposed or when a nation decides to act unilaterally, what goes on in your mind in terms of how you're going to be expanding across geographies? Because, you'll have to navigate these kind of geopolitical challenges.
I think these kind of these forums, these impacts, these bilateral ties are very important, because at the end, to overcome all these challenges, you have to open a lot of markets for Indian domestic players for able to sell their products and services across the globe. So these bilateral types, right, as of now they're happening in Oman, are very important. And as a payments company, the cross-border licenses are important here. That today, RBI has had a regulation change this 2025, where it talks about payment aggregator cross-border licenses and how these licenses can be then utilized to empower business houses, small and medium enterprise houses in the country in order for them to do businesses in Oman, in other countries, and any other country. So I think it's a mixture of regulation, policies, and effort of the government to open up these bilateral ties, and then opening up more markets and then reducing the dependency of the current markets, which all the region, with all the merchants or probably the businesses have on focusing. So if today we have bilateral ties with Oman and we have better trade ties with them, Then as a payments business, you could focus on payment aggregator, cross-border licenses, on order for SMEs to be able to sell their product and services in that region, and then focus on the bilateral ties. So I think opening more regions is really going to help overcome, like the previous question, about these challenges. And we have to give a sustainable platform to the businesses, small business in houses in the country, in order to be able to expand themselves abroad.
Right, so I'm going to be talking about your expansion, not just in India, but of course globally as well. But let me talk to you about the FTA, the India-Oman FTA. That, ladies and gentlemen, has been the big news of the day. This is the second FTA that India has signed with, after India signed an agreement with UK. What do you think it's going to do to businesses like yourselves who are, of course, already are operating in the GCC circuit? You're also looking at expanding to other geographies as well in Europe. But what do FTAs essentially do to businesses like yourselves?
So we also have a company in Oman. We are in the process of licensing in Oman as well. So for us, it's a little bit different because we have to go to each geography and get ourselves licensed in each geography. What we do, what these does put an impact on us is to get a more customer base or merchant base in regions in order to give them those services. So if you open a region today, then we can sell our Indian entity, our Indian entity, licensed entity by RBI, can then sell them more kind of products to ease and facilitate the business tie-ups. So I think for us, it doesn't make a huge difference, but it does enable us to our interoperable rails and to promote our interoperable rails to promote small businesses.
To promote small businesses also, and to de-risk as well, as against being only concentrated in one geography. By the way, Mr. Gill, I have to tell you that you're a shining example of the Prime Minister's Make in India, Make for the World. You started your business here in India, and of course now you're expanding across the world. Middle East is where you have a considerable presence. So tell us about, your India growth story. Let's map your growth here in the India market. And why did you decide to sort of move into the GCC circuit, into the Middle East?
I think India has been a very great example when it comes to specifically, you talk about UPI payment rails, and UPI, NPCI has been a great example when it comes to domestic payments across the world. So spending about 4 to 5 years in India, we realized that domestic payments is the future of every country. So having been considerable experience in this particular market, we realized that if we do take this milestone, and the milestone was achieved by India and NPCI and everybody, and we do take this successful model abroad in other regions which are also trying to focus on domestic payments, it could be a more profitable and more like a financial ecosystem creation. So hence we decided 2.5 years ago to establish a HQ in UAE, to base our headquarters there so that expansion can become easier from there. And started thinking in a reverse way, where that we already licensed in India and how we can get licenses. Currently, as we speak, we are speaking to 16 regulators across the globe: Turkey, Oman, Saudi, Bahrain, Qatar, Europe, UK. So what we are trying to build is to learn, and we have learned ourselves from how domestic schemes can create a big financial freedom for all kind of businesses, and how money movement faster can make a big impact on the economy, and how is that then benefits the SMEs. So that particular model, we took it to UAE, and then we are trying to recalibrate that model with their policies and their frameworks and domestic schemes. It's a bit of work, but yeah, it's going in the right direction.
All right. So you essentially say that you are moving in the right direction. You began here in India. That was the growth opportunity that you spotted. And of course, there is still plenty of, growth to be done by your company here in the India market. But when we talk about challenges of somebody who's trying to sort of scale globally, what is more difficult at this point in time? Is it trust, or is it more regulations?
I think it's neither trust, neither regulation. It's more willpower, I think, which is important, because we have to be very patient with the regulators across the globe. Because if you are to be licensed in any country, you have to abide by the law of the sovereign nation. You have to abide by the law of the compliances. So I think more than that is the patience which you have to kind of be focused and patient that does, because a regulatory process has its own course of time and course of law. So you have to kind of understand there is investment involved, there is patience involved, there is compliance involved, and how you can just be patient and then go past that stage of where it takes 1 to 2 years to get a license, 6 months in some countries, faster in some countries, it could take more than 2 years in some countries. So, and how you have to kind of navigate, because every country has their own compliance regulations, own compliance policies, different regulations, and how you have to adopt yourself and try to be regulated and then work towards the license of that particular country. So I think it's a mixture of willpower and patience. Then when it comes to compliance and law, 90% of compliance norms across the globe are same. There's only 10% variation where you feel that the compliance law in India would be very different than compliance law in the UK. I think the variation is not more than 10 to 15%. 80 to 85% is mostly the compliance norms are same.
But why is it that, Mr. Gill, that many other companies have not sort of scaled up, especially in the payment space? They've not scaled up globally. They've largely catered to the India market. What are some, so for instance, if somebody has to sort of scale to other geographies and replicate the model here in India into some of the other countries, what do you think they should do? What are some of your learnings that they can learn from?
I think the companies who have already focused on the payment space in India have not really probably thought about that. Because you get such large transactions here, the market is huge, so you just get involved in such day-to-day and you get overwhelmed with number of transactions you do here, and you just feel that you could grow more and more in India. And so that could be one of the reasons why the fintech players in India are not focusing on getting licenses abroad. That could be the reason. I don't know the reason, what reason could be. And on the other hand, it is to create that financial ecosystem, there has to be in business line with them. But I don't think that if we try and focus on, companies should try and apply license across the globe. Yeah, it is possible, and we have done it, and we've been a good example of that. I think more companies should, because the good part is there's a lot to learn, and these companies over here who are working, have good market share, have a lot of experience on working on transactions and amount and higher GMVs. So it is not that we do not have experienced companies in India who do not have the experience. I mean, you talk about, UPI payments today, we account for about 49% of the total transactions across the globe. That's the IMF data which I'm talking to you about. So there is a lot of much more experienced companies than across the globe in India. It is just that it becomes very overwhelming probably for fintech companies in India, and the numbers are so high, so they don't feel the need to expand globally. But I think now the next stage is what every company needs to focus is that we've done a great job with the domestic payments in India and building rails domestically, instant settlements, and great pricing for merchants to grow, and the great ecosystem. It's time for India to actually focus on a financial ecosystem which is globally more acceptable.
Absolutely. It's time for Indian companies, Indian startups to build for the world as well, especially as they see success here in the India market. When we talk about the startup ecosystem, you'd know that it is the third largest. And that's something that the government of India has, of course, exhorted businessmen and, of course, startup founders and entrepreneurs like yourselves as well, given the fact that we have tie-ups and we are looking at doing bilateral relationships, having bilateral ties with countries one-on-one, and countries across the world are looking at doing FTAs with India as well. So what better time than this to sort of make the most of this opportunity? But let me also ask you about, can India become the settlement layer of the global south? Because we've sort of raised their concerns, as far as the global south is concerned. And what are some of the challenges that you foresee?
I think definitely the answer is yes. There is no reason why India cannot be the settlement layer for the global south. We already have process in place. We are, just one of example, we are closely working with BIS, and we are part of a project called Project Aperta, where there are about 20 nations who are participating in Project Aperta, focusing on settlement layers, and we have great examples of that, what we have done in India. And I think NIPL is also working, signing MOUs across the globe. I don't think there is a regulation barrier as such in terms of being a settlement layer. I think the guidelines are very clear. There could be, and I feel that there could be, we need more policy level changes at how the money moves and how the settlement happens between the nations. And there could be, we would require more bilateral trades, tie-ups like we're seeing in Oman today. So to even focus on how the settlement can move between the countries. And if you talk about infrastructure, you talk about the technological advancement, I think yes, we do have it.
Can we export our payment stack as well as we've done with IT services?
I think we are doing that at the moment right now. NIPL is doing it. So that is being done as we speak. NIPL has exported their stack when it comes to in UAE. So I think that is happening as we speak. The only thing which is not happening at the same speed and momentum is the adoption of that in those countries. I mean, there are various reasons for that. It could be adoption policy level at that country level, and the push at the the bilateral ties between the country, the policy in terms of how the policy and regulations, in terms of policy, technologically advancement and everything. But I think we are moving towards that direction.
Okay, let me also talk to you about the other kind of disruption that we are seeing. I mean, of course, trade-related disruptions are completely on one side of the spectrum. And then you have AI-related disruptions, of course, which are AI is disrupting industries. Let me also ask you about, the payments industry as a whole. Very many industries are seeing efficiencies as a result of AI getting deployed into their systems. The IT industry, if you see that as an example, you see very many startups also. They're also deploying agents. There is agentic AI, which many companies are now investing heavily into. But how will it transform the payments ecosystem? Because there are payments that are happening in a fraction of a second. So what will AI bring to the table?
I think AI will play a huge role when it comes to AML and transaction monitoring. I think that's where everybody's exploring right now in AI. How can AI help? How can AI help and detect fraud before it happens? That's something which AI will play a huge role. If you ask me about it, AI can make payments faster. I mean, we're already doing instant settlements. Fraction of seconds will not make a huge difference in terms of payment going faster. But yes, if we actually use AI for transaction monitoring, AML, and right type of screening, and then analyzing the data from different geographies we receive or different departments we receive, and then we try to preempt and predict the transaction behavior, and then accordingly try to stop a fraudulent transaction, is where I think AI will play a huge role.
You are investing in AI in a big way?
Yes, we are we are investing a lot in AI when it comes to transaction monitoring systems, TMS systems. We are building so AI is just how quickly it can learn from the data which you have and trying to preempt a situation to not to happen. And I think cybersecurity, compliance, and AML screening is a huge priority for all the regulators across the globe. That is the key priority: cybersecurity, AML screening, and data protection. So I think AI plays a huge role there, and we are investing in AI for risk monitoring perspective. Yes.
But does it always have to be an expensive affair as far as investments into AI are concerned?
It is not expensive. It's not expensive. To be very honest, we don't need millions and billions to invest in it. AI, and that's the beauty of AI. You don't need to invest. We are building a transaction monitoring system. So today, it's not that expensive. Maybe probably 2 years ago it was, but today, no. There's so many tools available. But AI, it looks expensive, but in all fractionality, it does not.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about the fintech ecosystem in terms of, what are the next set of trends that you're foreseeing? Where will investments go? Because, if you see India's startup ecosystem or globally as well, fintech is one space where investors have continued to pump in money. In India itself, there are very many unicorn, at least 30 of them, and there are thousands of, companies that are into fintech, into payments as well. Where do you think the next set of growth is going to come from as far as payments is concerned, in your opinion?
I think investors are looking at profitable companies at the moment. That's one major area where investors are looking at. They want to invest in fintechs who are highly profitable. Second, either profitable or that landscape or the distribution network is that fintech creating. Not just domestically, globally as well. Today, if you talk about interoperability, which was a dream in terms of domestic schemes, it was never heard of 4 years ago. I mean, domestic schemes were not heard of 6 years ago. And now, investors are looking more at how fintechs can now stage level 2 solve the international financial ecosystem. And how can they make things faster across the globe as well. So that's one part where investments are going in. Like I previously said about BIS investing in Project Aperta and fintechs participating in these kind of G20 BIS kind of a projects to improve settlements, and how can CBDC then be also used as a tool to make fractional payments across the globe. And also profitability is where today investors are looking at to invest in fintechs, where profitability, I think profitability and scalability of and interoperability are the three words where investors looking to invest in fintech.
Right. Are you also investing in fintech companies? Are you investing
We are
in
a
companies?
fintech company.
Yeah, I mean, are you investing in other smaller companies, and do you think there's going to be more consolidation?
I think we are more focused on expanding in a lot of countries ourselves. So that itself is a very big investment when it comes to expanding in different regions, different countries. That itself takes a lot of our time and investment. So yes, we are currently, as we said, speaking to 16 regulators. So that means 16 licenses. So that itself is a big investment. So right now, yes, we are not considering investment into different companies, but our current focus is to invest and then create a big global platform for interoperability.
Right. So, Mr. Gill, you spoke about a very interesting point about, dealing with different regulators. So let's talk about when companies have to scale globally, when Indian companies have to look at sort of building their operations, building their companies into other geographies. What are some of the biggest challenges that they face, and what can they learn from your experience in terms of navigating these very different geographies?
I think, like I previously said, patience is very key, and I get to hear
Patience
this.
towards what?
Patience towards that license will come, it will take time. It doesn't come in days or months. It does take its own course of action. And secondly, I think that we have to understand that companies, there is a fear, there is a fear of that the regulations are so tough that you will apply for a license, you will get rejected. We have to understand that we are already regulated by RBI, and the regulations are not, different across the globe. We initially, when we applied in UAE, was the first country we applied to. So we had this assumption that it's a very tough, different compliance regulation. But now that we see 80% regulation and compliances are very similar to what. So we are right now also working in a very regulated environment in India itself. So there's nothing which new you have to create. Of course, you have to keep every individual company at an arm's length difference, and it has to be governed by the regulator of that particular country. Even the board has to be completely different. So it can't be like controlled by India, cannot be controlled by UAE cannot be controlled. And you have to be very clear in how data is localized in every country, and then it doesn't. So you just have to be more cautious and have a right approach to kind of apply in different countries. And capital requirement is that's another challenge, because there is huge capital requirement when it comes to licenses across the globe. I mean, today you are looking at 35 million dirhams is the capital requirement for UAE. This could be 15 million dirhams in different jurisdictions. We've got license in Morocco. It took us about 2.5 years. We are one of the only first foreign company to ever get a license in Morocco, not just Indian company, any foreign company. It takes a lot of effort in explaining the vision, but I think India has created a great example by the domestic schemes. I think that helps us very easily to navigate through licenses, because the moment they see that you are an Indian-based company and then you've worked on UPI and NPCI, so that automatically brings credibility that you have worked on a domestic scheme which has been very successful, and then you could replicate that model in that country. So I think that fear of being rejected is what everybody has to overcome and say, you know what, there's only one way to find out, right? The only way to find out is to go apply and try a license. I mean, you cannot assume that I will not get a license here. And that is the reason, if you will see that across the globe, as we are speaking to a lot of regulators, it is not the rejection rate is high or it is tough. It is very few companies have applied for it. So we really can't comment upon what effort they had to go to. I mean, how many have applied for it? I've seen very few, very, very few. And if very few companies are applying for it, so that could not be a factor where the regulation is tough or the entry is tough. I think it's more of a thing of a comfort zone, because we have such large transactions, there's such a large population here, so we just feel, no, I think India is a big market enough for us, and then we should focus. And also, I was having a discussion about this, I think 2 weeks back, where they said that India is a very largely crowded fintech market. It does look crowded, but it's not actually crowded. Though, if you talk about a GMV perspective or a market share perspective, largely market share is driven by 5 to 7 companies in the entire country. There could be about 50 odd companies or more who are licensed by the RBI. But the large market share still lies between 5-7 companies. So, I mean, there is opportunity available. There's a lot of more profitability in terms of available. India is a very price sensitive market, especially with UPI and everything. So there is opportunity available. And see, and the other part which we are missing, which we have to understand, is that India is a large inward remittance market. And the entire inward remittance market is being encashed by non-Indian entities. So today, the remittance coming into India, which could be anywhere between $80 billion to $100 billion and could grow even larger stage, is right now being operated and controlled by non-Indian entities, which that's why we are focusing on GCC, because GCC is a sending market, and India, and Egypt for us, and Morocco for us, and India is also a receiving end. And so, I mean, if focus is there, and the experience is definitely there with the Indian entities, with the large transactions happening, so it is not a dream. It is a very fearful reality, and we've got license, so we absolutely understand it.
Right, and of course, you also spoke about inward remittances. So as a business, you are capitalizing on that huge opportunity that really persists in this market. But speaking about opportunities, we did speak about, Mr. Gill, a short while back about the interoperability of UPI, given the fact that UPI and DPI have been one of the biggest success stories of this government, especially in how social schemes have gotten disbursed and how there's been an inclusion of people who were not earlier connected, right? But you were talking about interoperability of UPI using AI, and that is going to unleash the next frontier of growth.
Yes, I think interoperability is the next thing. Today, as we speak, that we have been trying to, and we've had successful MOUs, bilateral trades with many countries, but the adoption is still not there. We've had successful tie-ups with various countries across the globe when it comes to NIPL and UPI. The reason for that is not the policy or regulation. I think it is the use case for that UPI in that country. So today, the adoption of UPI has been largely because it is fast, it is much cheaper. So if you talk about interoperability, now hence the reason why we are getting licenses on both sides. Because it will be in our interest in UAE, if we have a license and we have a license in India, to make this successful. In order for us, for Indian tourists who are landing in UAE, and they can leverage their UPI apps in India and make payments across our merchants, which will be in UAE. When you are only furnishing one leg, so if an Indian entity is right now focusing, and then of course NIPL will do as a regulator, as a enabler, will trying to build the rails and trying to tie up. But it also, there has to be on that end somebody entrusted to adopt it. And for that, the pricing and the settlement time matters. So interoperability will only work if the use case is resolved for somebody in that country. It is not just, and the use case is resolved for somebody traveling there. So if today you go to UAE, it is a matter of convenience for you to use the same UPI app which you're using in India, and then go in UAE, use the same UPI app which is then debited by your bank account, and then you can make a payment. It absolutely makes more sense for you. But that's one part of it, operability. When you talk about interoperability, it should also make sense for a merchant in UAE to accept UPI. Now that only depends on the payment aggregator over there, whose merchant that belongs to, and also depends upon the time of settlement which NPCI is providing to that aggregator, and then that aggregator is leveraging that to the merchant. If that merchant feels that there is an opportunity for him to get a better price, faster rate than the other competition, which could be an international payment scheme, which you would probably use a card or debit card or credit card to make a payment right now. So if there is a value addition for the merchant to not use that card at that transaction and use a UPI, that is where interoperability will be created.
All right, but will it not also expose systems and networks in countries to vulnerabilities, especially in this age where cyber attacks are, happening by the dozen, and countries only have to, sort of be alert to avert those kind of cyber attacks because bad actors are getting smarter than regulators?
I think it's the other way around. I think it'll de-risk it. Right now, you're heavily dependent on 2 or 3 international schemes to operate these interoperability tie-ups. If you are trying to make domestic schemes interoperable, so if your interoperability is happening in 18 countries, so it is 18 sovereign nations protecting their domestic scheme. So the cyber security threat, or it's more de-risking than risking. Right now, the entire rails are being built by 2 or 3 international schemes across the globe. So if you de-risk it to then 18 nations running their own domestic scheme and then interoperability between them, then securing your nation, I think all the sovereign nations are wealthy enough to do that.
All right. Let me just get in a few final questions because we have a couple of more minutes to go. The kind of growth that you are anticipating from the India market and of course the other markets, since you said that there is a huge opportunity that lies in this market, but what is it the kind of growth that you're factoring here versus the GCCs?
We were in a B2B as of this year, and now we're launching the UPI app, the B2C model. So we see there's ample growth to be there, because right now the entire market share is being held by 2 or 3 companies. So we feel there are more players who could come and participate in that. We are leveraging that. We are leveraging that with our interoperability schemes, other nations, that how we can offer a better pricing to what we call as the GIG economy providers who are sending money back home, and how we can link that to our current app, and then it can promote our share. So we see a lot more market share increase in B2C in our app in India in future, which we do not have right now, which will be launching in Q1 next year.
Right. So you're speaking about, of course, growth, and you've not given us the numbers. But let's talk about scaling up across the borders, across different geographies. What is the most difficult aspect? Is it more about trust? Because we've spoken about the regulations, but is trust the big factor given the kind of disruptions that we're seeing across the globe? Is that something that businesses are more worried about?
I think it's setting up that business along with the license and everything is what takes more time and more effort and investment. And then it's not easy because because every entity you get a license to has to be operated independently, so have to get the entire stack of, so you cannot have a CEO of India operating the CEO entity in UAE. So then you have to have separate technology stack, separate, the leadership team, completely separate board of directors. So it is that the entire setup is time consuming and investment required, and then the license. So first you have to do this setup and then apply for the license. You cannot get the license then apply for it. So there's also risk involved in it, that you might end up creating an office and a setup for about 2 years to wait for license. Then you may or you may not get license, because at the end of the day, it is the regulator who decides at the end whether you should be licensed or not. So I think that whole process of setting up the entire, and because unlike in India, the regulation is very different. So in India, the regulation for RBI says that first you apply for a license, you get an in-principle approval. After the in-principle approval, you can do the setup, and then you can and then apply for a final approval. This is not the case in every regulator. In Europe, in Egypt, I could name 4 more countries where you have to do the entire setup and then apply for the license.
So how would you rank each of these countries that you've mentioned in terms of ease of doing business versus India?
I think I should avoid that. I am right now dealing with 16 regulators. I cannot be biased which one is faster, but I think more or less everybody's taking a similar time. Today, if you talk about licensing issue and time, I think most countries are at par of the timings.
So when we talk about the ease of doing business, this is something that perhaps India needs to look at. We are, of course, working in that direction, whether it's related to sort of making funding more accessible to startups, of course, reducing the number of compliances as well. But that you feel is the need of the hour?
I think there is enough. I don't think there's a need for reducing compliance. I think that's something which regulator will never do. So there's no point. Like it doesn't really affect. One has to be compliant. There is no other option. Even today, the investors are also looking at companies which are putting compliance first.
Yes.
Because the moment you try to compromise with compliance is when you could get on a different edge with the regulator. So today, more compliance, or if the regulator has to do their job. If they have to put 5 more compliances on you, you have to abide by it, and you have to take it in a very positive way, and you have to go by it. I think Indian ecosystem now is not the same it used to be 5 or 10 years ago. There's a lot of opportunity here. The regulator is much more friendly and very aggressive. What we have seen, licenses being issued in India in past 3 years, this is not the pace which you see everywhere across the globe.
Right.
You don't see at that stage.
Right. We have time for one final question. 3 trends that you foresee in the space of payments over the next couple of years.
I think large creating a distribution network for lending, interoperability, and ease of doing business for, it could be a domestic scheme or something.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much,
Thank you
Mr.
so
Gill,
much.
for taking the time out and being here with us at the India Economic Conclave. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gill, and thank you, Sumita, for that. Well, ladies and gentlemen,